If you're a beginner to sourdough but have no idea where to start, this is my step-by-step guide for you. Let's make some bread. The night before we make our dough, we need to feed our starter. When making sourdough, it's best to use a kitchen scale to get the most accurate measurements. So here I'm adding 50 grams of starter, 50 grams of unbleached bread flour, and 50 grams of filtered water. This will ensure that we have enough for our recipe tomorrow and we'll have some left over to continue feeding. After you feed your starter, you want to let it rise overnight, and you want to make sure it's doubled in size and starting to fall before we make our dough. Now it's the next morning and it's time to make our dough. We're going to add 100 grams of that active bubbly starter, 350 grams of filtered water, and we're going to mix that together until we get a milky consistency. From there, we add 500 grams of unbleached bread flour. I prefer the King Arthur brand bread flour, and 10 grams of salt. If you do not own a kitchen scale or prefer not to use one, I will put the cup measurements in the caption for you. I mix the dough until there's no more dry flour clumps. Here I needed to add just a little more water to make that happen. If you need to do the same, just make sure you're doing it in very small amounts. We're going to cover that and let it rest for 1 hour. Now it's time to move on to our stretch and folds. Stretch and folds build the needed strength and structure to our dough. To perform the stretch and fold, I start with wet hands. I gently reach under my dough, pulling it up and folding it into the middle. I quarter turn my bowl, and I do this on all 4 sides of the dough. While doing these stretch and folds, you want to make sure that you're not tearing your dough. We're going to do 4 rounds total, spacing 30 minutes apart. I want to point out that 30 minutes is a suggestion, not a rule. So if you have errands to run or have things to do, you can definitely wait longer than 30 minutes in between these folds. Now we're on stretch and fold round number 2. You can see that our dough is a lot stronger and it's starting to firm up a bit. You'll notice as you go through these 4 rounds that your dough is starting to turn more into a dough ball versus a loose dough. After our 4 rounds of stretch and folds, we're going to let this dough rest another 3 to 4 hours. This is called bulk fermentation. In bulk fermentation, rest times depend on your dough temperature. So it will be different for everybody, but there are some visual signs to look for when your dough is ready. It will almost be doubled in size, jiggly, airy, and bubbly. If you tap on the bottom of your bowl, it will sound hollow. Once our dough is done bulk fermenting, now it's time to shape. I dump my dough out onto the surface and I use a spray bottle to wet my hands and this bench scraper. You shouldn't have to use massive amounts of flour to keep your dough from sticking. I only use water. I stretch my dough into a rectangle as far as I can get it without tearing. From there, I take the right side of my dough and fold it into the middle. Then I take the left side of my dough and fold it on top of that. Now, starting from the bottom, we are going to roll this dough up. As you can see, I'm trying to roll the edges of the dough into the center as I'm rolling it all up. Now that it's in a log shape, we're going to tuck those edges underneath the dough. This is going to create that ball shape and some tension in the top of our dough. I'm pushing that dough ball towards me, turning it and pushing it away from me, doing a push, turn, pull, turn movement. I do about 8 to 10 of these, trying not to rip the top of the dough. It may feel awkward at first if you've never done it, but the more you practice it, the better you'll get. We're going to cover our dough and let it rest for 30 minutes, and after the 30 minutes, you'll notice that it's spread out quite a bit. Before I do the final shaping, I like to prepare either my banneton basket. If you don't have one of these, you can also use just a bowl with a towel covering it. Using wet hands and a bench scraper, we're going to flip our dough over and we're going to do the exact same thing as we did the first time. Only this time you'll notice that your dough is a lot stronger and it's not going to stretch as easily. This is going to give our dough better structure and height when it's baked. You can definitely skip this second round of shaping if you need to, but it could result in a flatter loaf. When we're finished shaping, we're going to take that ball of dough, flip it upside down. So we want this smooth side down into our banneton basket. If you see the dough trying to split, you could do something called stitching. So it's just grabbing an edge of that dough and pulling it towards the middle. Now I'm going to cover this dough in the banneton basket, and there are 2 options we have. My preferred option is putting this in the refrigerator overnight. Or if you want to bake this today, you could do a second rise at room temperature for another 2 hours. When you're ready to bake, just flip your dough upside down onto some parchment paper. I sprinkled a little bit of rice flour on the top of my dough. This is totally optional, but doing this will help any of your decorative scoring pop. I grabbed my bread lawn. This is a UFO bread lawn. I got this on Amazon Amazon for around $5. I have all the tools that I use linked on my Amazon storefront. I start by doing my decorative scoring first. Here I'm doing a wheat stock, and then I go on to my expansion score. When doing your expansion score, you want to make sure that your bread loam is angled. I'm making a cut from the top to the bottom of my dough, and this is going to tell my dough where to expand while it's baking. While I preheat my oven, I keep my Dutch oven inside, so that way when I put my dough in, it's already hot. I put that Dutch oven inside the oven at 450 degrees for 30 minutes covered and 15 minutes uncovered. When your loaf is done, immediately take it out of that Dutch oven and put it onto a wire cooling rack. You can admire your beautiful work, but if you can, try to let this cool for 1 to 2 hours. Cutting too early can lead to a gummy texture. Now that we've made it this far, congratulations on your beautiful loaf of sourdough. I hope this video helped you. If you have any questions, leave them for me in the comments, and make sure you're following me if you're not already.